Yo, 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 what is up, everybody? In this video, I'm going to take you through a little journey I went on. I recently bought a 3D printer, and I also watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and it's this scene right here. The chili cook-off. One of my favorite scenes, of course in this movie, but really in any movie. And that trophy, I wanted that trophy. I couldn't find it anywhere, so I decided I'd 3D print it. Look at that trophy.
Tell the secret of that fabulously tasty chili.
The cook.
It's the meat.
We play a lot of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the game.
I got a real good eye for
That's been pretty fun.
prime meat.
Well, this is the part where I go in to find the reference images of the trophy. Just do a quick search on the internet here, photos. You can find these on Google, I'm sure. And there's a few out there. Some of them do appear different. And I picked one that looked close enough, but not quite the same as the one in the movie. There are still some key differences. I just wanted to pick one that had good detail, that I felt confident in modeling and printing. I wanted to use a reference image so I could trace the outline with a Bezier curve. There's a lot of videos on YouTube how to use the Bezier curve. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm not really good with pronunciation. Anyways, you'll see me here use this curve to outline the Texas state itself. And yes, I am doing this all manually, so it took me quite a lot of time. Oh, I should state at this point that I am a complete noob. I've been using Blender on and off for a few years now, and I really mean on and off, mostly off. I don't do 3D modeling in Blender. Actually, I haven't done 3D modeling in Blender much at all, other than a few times, and so this really helped me develop my skills in Blender. I really enjoyed the process. I will say that it was fun, and that's what makes it, that's the most important part. Is you gotta find the enjoyment in the process, because it can get a bit grueling, but overall you learn a lot. At this point, you'll see I was looking for the fonts. I didn't want to have to trace out the font using more curves. That is one method to create that font cutout. It looks like these are actually engraved into this Texas. The text itself is engraved into the Texas state. I didn't want to have to draw all of that out manually, so I was just looking for a font that I could use. I think the font I ended up choosing was Courier MT Bold. I tried a few other fonts to see how it looked at first. I didn't really like it. So I kept changing between them to find the one that I liked. But I did need to use some scaling to get the font size to match what was in the reference image. And you'll see here I got it pretty close with some of these, but I ultimately changed the font to a different one later. Again, I think it was this one here. Now, at this point, what I would recommend is not to create any cutouts with the fonts just yet, because it really complicated things when I wanted to round out the edges of the Texas state. So at this point, I was going down a path I really shouldn't have. Again, this is because I'm still learning how to use Blender and how to 3D model in it. Also, you'll notice that I'm switching between this like blue and red appearance here in the 3D model. I found out that this is really important when you're trying to use Boolean cutters, and what I mean is the red shows kind of an inverted face normals, so you want to make sure everything's blue before you use the Boolean modifier. That probably sounds like a bunch of nonsense, but you'll see here as I start to cut out the text from the Texas state itself, you'll see the appearance that it looks like it's an engraving. That's how you're able to do it. Make sure you have the face normal set properly. Beyond this part here, I think I was trying a few things. Of course, with the text, you add in the text, and it's the same as the Bezier curve. You have to convert it to a mesh before you can work with it in 3D. So all of this gets converted to a mesh. Now, again, at this point, I went down a path I shouldn't have. So yeah, you'll see here, I wanted to round out the edges using a bevel. Um, and it just was not going well, especially with the tight corners on the state itself, but also, having the text in there too. I couldn't edit it much. I couldn't edit much after this. It just made editing a nightmare. There were so many vertices with the text in there too, so I ended up going back and redoing um, the text portion of this. Here you can see I'm looking online for help. I also found that ChatGPT was really helpful in answering some questions. At this point, ChatGPT is a really good tool, but it's not always giving me like what I'm looking for. But I find that's probably just the way I'm asking the questions. So here I'm deleting the faces, seeing if I can repair these edges or do anything about them so I can start to round them out, but it really was not going well. This whole process right here was just kind of frustrating for me. But again, as a newbie, I found that this was, an enriching experience. I could learn from it. Now, at this point, it looked like I rounded out those edges using a bevel. I actually had to bring this into sculpt mode, remesh it, so that way I had enough geometry to where I could round out the edges using a smooth brush. From here, quickly modeled up the cup that goes on top. You'll see the peg structures I'm designing in here so that way all the pieces can plug together. The bottom peg I made square so that way the Texas state itself could not rotate on that top mounting plate. And the bowl on top, I just used a round peg because I wasn't concerned with it rotating as much. Of course, the Texas state needed to remain nice and even on that mounting plate there. This part, I get to design that mounting plate, add in some bevels, some nice cuts to make it appear just like it does in the reference image. I learned later that some of my lines were not as straight in this, so there were some little artifacts I noticed in the 3D print when I printed it out, but overall, I think it turned out pretty nice. Now, these here are actually the screws for the main legs of the trophy, the top nuts that go on top of this plate. And I really enjoyed this process. It was fun adding in all the bevels, creating the geometry. It actually came together quite fast. But one thing that I would have changed is made them bigger. They actually turned out quite small, and I just should have stepped back from the design at this point and gauged how small they were compared to the overall trophy. Use a mirror modifier, and that way I can mirror them across the X and Y axes without having to use duplicate or anything fancy, so it makes it really easy, just getting comfortable using the modifiers menu. At this point, I designed the legs. The legs at this point were not going to be as long as what you see in the movie, and I knew that going into it, that this trophy I was going to 3D print would be quite a bit shorter, or not as tall as the trophy in the movie. And that's because of, I didn't want to have to print out multiple sections of legs to glue together and have, a giant trophy. I'd rather just have one nicely printed piece that I could just glue into the top and bottom plates. So I was willing to accept that trade-off here, and of course my printer cannot print more than 256 millimeters in height, which, by the way, I should mention, I'm using the Bamboo Labs P1S printer with the AMS uh, filament system. And actually, this printer is really nice. I got it on sale for the early Black Friday deals that Bamboo Labs was offering. So I picked one up. It's my first one and always wanted one, but just never had the chance to get one. So now they're actually doing really great with performance. Now, at this part, I'm designing the bottom plate at kind of the base of the trophy along with that center emblem, which I have no idea what that center emblem is. So you're going to see me design this here with it looks like a bird or an eagle that I was going after. I was thinking I'd create a another peg for the emblem itself so it could plug into this piece, but it turns out you'll see later I just design it all as one piece. So that center emblem and kind of cylinder itself is just one piece. And that ended up making it very easy for me. I didn't have to assemble anything. Here I'm sculpting. I just took a cube, remeshed it, first did a subdivision surface modifier on it, then remeshed it after using some of the brush tools in the sculpt mode. And I just really love sculpting, so I took a quick stab at this and ended up redoing it all anyways. But here I was going for some sort of like a bird or a bat or an eagle, and it didn't really turn out that well. I just wanted to make it look close to what I was seeing in the reference image. Now, the hardest part I found was getting a font for the numbers because in the Windows fonts folder that I was using, I could not find any examples that had numbers in them. So they were just letters. And it took quite a bit of trial and error. I'm sure there would be a much easier way to look this up and figure out what font to use. But I wanted to go with something more like what was in the reference image, like in the movie, and ended up going with this font here. That way the numbers appear a little bit more square, and I figured that would be easier and more, um, I guess, easier to print. But at this point, I just wanted it to look more like the video, like what was in the movie, than anything else. Oh, by the way, this peg, you might have seen it earlier, that if you design the pegs to be the same size as the hole they fit into, they actually won't fit that easily because it would be too tight of a fit. So you have to create some sort of a tapering effect to the pins where at the top of the pin going into the hole, you slightly scale it down. You want to slightly scale it down. You can just eyeball it. So I taper it up to the top, but maybe for the last few millimeters of peg, it's the full diameter, and that allows for a very snug fit into the attaching components. I found that worked very well. Up here, you'll see I'm touching up the chili bowl. I was having fun with the sculpting again, testing out using the mask brush, so that way I could just um, kind of create a more defined edge to the bowl here without messing up any other pieces of the bowl itself. So that mask brush is really helpful. And again, here's me using ChatGPT to answer some questions that I had, and it's been very helpful. Um, in this case, I was ready to print. I realized that the base of the trophy was as big as my build plate, so I wanted to scale that down, hopefully save a little bit of material, and make it a faster print. The other side of it was, figuring out how to join all of the geometry together in one component so that I'd have, a nice solid print for the base, for example, and one print plate for the legs, and another print plate for the emblem, and another print plate for all the other pieces. So it's like in steps, you just print them out one by one. And some of these took, a good chunk of time to print. I think the base plate took the longest to print. It was about 4 to 5 hours to print, and I did that using I think like a 15% infill, probably not that much infill, 5% infill. Yeah, like really went light on the infill, and it came out pretty lightweight in the end, but not as strong as I'd like for it to be. So it's not something that is too durable, but it is easy to carry. You'll see here I printed the bowl in its upright position, and it needed a lot of support material on the bottom. Here you can see the center emblem. Just wanting to, to make sure that that was one piece, that when I print it, whether it needed support for the wings on the bird or, support for the numbers is yet to be seen here, but it actually came out quite nice. You'll see later. At this point, had some issues with the geometry, and the Bamboo Studio was giving me some errors, so I needed to fix that. Here, I'm simply fixing the geometry for that center emblem, and I found out this was an issue of duplicating too many objects and cutting using the Boolean modifier without getting rid of the duplicate objects, and there's just a mess. So what I'd recommend is just be very cautious when you use the duplicate function, the Shift D to duplicate an object. You gotta make sure to either delete that object if you don't need it, or integrate it as part of the geometry. So at this point, I was really running into those issues again, just learning, being a novice at this, just learning how to use the different Blender functionalities, the modifiers correctly, and using the edit mode correctly to not screw up the geometry further. And I think at this point you're going to see that I basically recreate that um, base of the emblem there, so that way I can not have to deal with all the screwed up geometry I had. Here I'm complaining to ChatGPT that it didn't work and asking for it to help me figure out what's going on. There's another tip here, which is, before you do anything with the modifiers, make sure to apply the scale. So I was using scaling to change the size of my objects a lot. Make sure to apply that scaling before you jump in and do modifiers or attempt to sculpt anything. Definitely apply the modifiers before you go sculpt it. So there's a lot of tips there that you'll learn, which, by the way, there's numerous videos on YouTube on how to sculpt and work with Blender. That's how I learned. And of course, just by using Blender, that's how I learned. Like in this video, I probably learned a whole bunch, just considering the amount of time I've been 3D modeling, which is not a lot, but I learned a lot sculpting this or creating this trophy. At this point, I found an issue with the pegs. I needed everything to be center, so that way, from the top plate to the legs to the bottom plate, that everything would mount perfectly. It was really cool to have all of these objects in one Blender file. That way I could, mate them up in the Blender viewport and see how well they would fit there before actually printing them and finding out if there were issues later. So it's very helpful to test fit everything in the 3D model before you go and print them. Now my favorite part, actually 3D printing this thing. I randomized the color of filament I used when I printed each object, but I knew I was going to have to paint this thing. And it's so entertaining watching these time lapses because it takes probably several hours for some of these parts to print, but you can see it happen all at once right here. And it's just like, wow, I could sit by the printer and watch this stuff all day. And here's what it looks like printed up and all ready for paint. Yeah, that's right, I do need to paint this because I printed it in some wonky colors. It looks kind of cool though. At least I really like how it turned out. Again, there were some things I would have changed, improved on, but I'm surprised and happy with how well it fit together. So, follow us over in the Discord if you'd like to keep up to date with the progress, or if you have any suggestions, post a comment down below. Would love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, and also subscribe if you're new and you want to follow and keep up to date with our latest videos. It would mean a lot. Thanks for sticking around. Oh, and I almost forgot. What good is the trophy without the hard shell peppercorns? I mean, that was a pretty important part of the scene. At least that's what made it most memorable for me. So I threw together a few of those here. Here's them sculpted up in Blender, and they're not difficult to make at all. You could simply create them from a UV sphere, remesh them, and sculpt them up very quickly. Um, but yeah, once you throw them in there, it adds the finishing touch for sure.
Whoop, whoop. It's one of those hard shell peppercorns.